All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
designers,
and performers.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Robert Dickens Jr. Another episode of Volta, joined by Elanders Frazier, John Gaal, and Ryan Reed. Hope you guys are doing well. This episode, we want to talk about advocacy, a second part to that. Last time we talked about advocating for students. And this time we want to talk about self-advocacy as an educator and designer. So I guess my first question would be for you guys. Could you talk about, I guess, what that means and like why you might have to advocate for yourself as an educator or designer? Like, why would that be something that, you know, is necessarily relevant to those of us that are listening or our listeners?
Well, I think we're already busy enough, at least from an educator standpoint. You got so much piled on you, both from your downtown district expectations of doing a competitive marching band against other districts, and probably even your own principal. Maybe their expectations is for it to either be competitive or just have a good time. And so you have all those after-school rehearsals, which other teachers, your math, your social studies, they don't have to do after-school teaching. They could do tutoring, maybe for some students for half hour, an hour before or after school. I just say maybe the amount of work that is expected to have a fulfilled or a really great program, it's a lot compared to other teachers. So I think in that regard, it's very important to advocate for yourself of that work-life balance of at the beginning of the season, creating that schedule, whether you're the head director or the assistant, talking with your team and coming down and creating a plan of this is when rehearsals are going to be, and we're not going to go anything more because, again, everyone's situation is different. Maybe you have a baby or small children, or you want to be more involved with your spouse or whatnot. Creating those plans with your team because is extremely important, because if you don't, then you'll soon recognize that the band, which is really a second family for anyone who's teaching in music, you're going to spend a lot more time with them than your own family yourself. So it's important to create that advocacy to your administration or to your parents or your boosters or maybe your own team members. I'm talking directors of, I'm with you, I want to build this program, but there needs to be some limits. Otherwise, I'm going to find a different career. And you see that, at least here in Texas, there's so many different job positions opening up each year, especially with the percussion, because I know everyone's working hard. The percussion, I mean, you're teaching your marching band, but then if you really want a well-rounded percussionist, you also need to do either some type of percussion ensemble or indoor setting, because the students aren't getting that musical education just sitting in the back for concert season. And then, you know, you have solo and ensemble and region and your own percussion performance, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're not too careful, you'll get overwhelmed with your job, and then the payout in your mind may not be worth it, and you'll get burnt out quickly. So I believe advocacy for you creating those boundaries or those expectations is extremely important.
Yeah, I think a great way to kind of tag on to that is just advocating for your sustainability, which is, I think, a lot of what John was talking about. Like, if you just keep giving and giving and giving and giving, eventually your cup is going to be empty to give from. So I think that's a great point in terms of advocating for what you need as a human to make it sustainable for yourself. Like, forget, well, last episode we talked about advocating for your program and your students and whatnot. I think that John hit it on the head, talking about like just the self-sustainability of maintaining that program, because eventually, the cup runs out, and then it either has to go away, or a break has to be taken, or people leave to start a new career, and then you basically start, the program then has to start over. So I think that's something that, and I know I'm guilty of it, don't advocate for enough of like, hey, this has to be sustainable for me in the long term as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, especially when we're talking about self-advocacy, like I think because anyone that's in the education field is probably someone that's very empathetic and giving, it can be very easy for us to get out of bounds and to give to a point to where like Ryan and John were saying, like we're empty, you know. And if you're not going to set those boundaries yourself, you're not going to advocate for what it is that you need, then no one else is going to do that for you. You know what I mean? You're helping to sustain a system. And I think that maybe what John was saying brings up another point is, are we putting ourselves in a position, if we want to teach long term, are we advocating for a system that allows for us to be successful for a long period of time? You know, rather than people burning out, like are we actually thinking about, okay, this is how long that I plan on being in this career, and like I'm making a successful transition to whatever I want to do next, versus like kind of being forced to leave because you know, for negative reasons. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's a lot of people that are leaving the profession for reasons that are in some ways beyond their control. But I mean, how important do you feel like self-advocacy is when it comes to the conversation of longevity and teaching?
Ooh. I, mm, I think you're touching on something that I think is an undercurrent of what we're seeing a lot of, right? Which is how do you balance sustaining what you've done for such a long period of time, right? Like essentially, like this is how I think about the conversation, right? Essentially, like how do you go out on top?
Correct.
And how do you exit without defaming what you have done? And to be honest, um there's been quite a few that have not been able to go that route. And that's just honesty. And I don't think we need to go into the details, but I think you know it does make us question and wonder, how do we put ourselves in that position? And maybe there is a thought in terms of that self advocacy to say that when you are setting up these systems that so many people depend on, whether it's a large staff, whether it's a large program with a lot of parents, a lot of instructors, whether it's very high performing, or whether it's just wide reaching, how do you put the system in place that allows it to maintain sustainability without one single person having to run all of it? And for the most part, how, even without them, and not to say that one person can't, you know be the final say for certain things, because I think it's good to have singular vision at times. But I do think it can become incredibly stressful and taxing for one person to kind of take the weight of all of those things for an extended duration of time, to try to make sure that they're worthwhile for everybody. Because what happens, I think, at times, is that now we put ourselves in a situation to where the question starts being asked, well, can it be done without this person? And once that question kind of starts being asked, I think at that point, it's like, now that's where that negative, what's the word that I'm trying to think of? I think that's kind of where that I don't even, yeah, that's where the negative stigma starts to creep itself in. It's like, well, I don't think this person, I don't think this program can survive without this person, etc. And it's like, well, you don't know that. You don't know if this program can survive without this person. You frankly don't know if this person has been running this program with other people all, this entire time altogether. Like that's such the funny thing that I think happens inside of this activity that we all kind of subscribe to, is that the only people that really know the ins and outs of any program that they subscribe to are the people that they work directly with it. And everyone else is just kind of watching from the outside and speculating. But unless they have intimate knowledge and they know people directly involved with what's happening in that program, they don't really know the direct lineage and what's happening in a day-to-day operation standpoint that's allowing this program to function. And I think from an advocacy standpoint, I think if you are an individual that is thinking about making this a long-term career, it is in your best interest to make sure that you are not the only person responsible for everything and all of it. When you talk about something that has the potential to withstand a long amount of time, because you don't know what could happen in your lifespan over time, right? Like John said, time with spouse, family, anything can happen. You can meet somebody, you have kids one day, you may decide you want to dip your toe into another field, different career, etc. And what you don't want to happen, you don't want to put yourself in a position to where you have created this situation where you're the sole provider for this thing. And when you're removed, it doesn't work, right? Like you're the sole machine and it doesn't work without you. I think the best thing that you can do is ensure that there is a system that functions, and as long as you've got someone kind of steering it, it can work, right? But that in itself takes advocacy, right? Because you have to be able to get those resources in place to build the ship to be steered. Because a lot of the times, it starts out with just one person paddling. This is me in my analogy bag, right? It starts with one person paddling, and that person, while they may be a great swimmer, they're the Michael Phelps of whatever they do, they don't want to swim forever. And they don't have the energy to swim forever. So the next stage is to build a boat. So now it's like, now I've built a boat. It's a single paddle boat. Okay. Now I'm starting to add people to my boat. Now I've got 3 people and we've all got oars. Okay. Now we're building a sailboat. We've got sails now. Okay. Now we're building a bigger ship. Now we've got a larger ship. Okay. Now it's gotten even larger now. Now we've got a yacht. Okay, cool. Now we've got a steamboat. Awesome. Now, you know what I mean? And we can keep escalating the vision until it's this mammoth of a thing. But what still holds true? You still got to have somebody steering that ship, or else it runs a course, right? Even though it started with one swimmer, you still got to have somebody steering that ship. And what you don't want to put yourself in a position of is that the only person that can steer that ship, or the only person that knows how to steer that ship, is the person that started out swimming.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. I was going to say, because I would feel like that would probably be one of the worst things to happen, is you put all this time and energy into a program, and then when you leave, it just completely dissolves. Because that's kind of like the legacy that you leave behind of those people that have been connected with you the entire time and what you built during that time. You would want to see that go on, so I feel like part of the advocacy conversation, because I do want to get to the financial aspect of that, because I feel like that's really important as well, is like advocating for the help and assistance that you need to put together the system that is going to help you be the most successful. Because no matter who you are as a percussion director or designer or whoever, like everyone has individual strengths. Everyone has a particular unique skill set, and you might need more help in one area than another in order for it to be sustainable for you. But no one's going to just build that for you. You know, like for instance, if you have a group, maybe in, let's say, in the early 2000s, you run an indoor program, you could have run it with like you doing the front ensemble and someone else doing the battery, and you have a color guard person come in every 2 weeks and like teach them a couple little frills here and there, and y'all made finals. But like that ain't the way the WGI works anymore. You know what I mean? Like the activity is way deeper, way more expansive and expressive, even on every single class that exists within the activity, right? Or drum corps, high school, whatever, right? So it would be to your advantage. I think there's a little bit of a crossroads. Like you're advocating for yourself in that, sure, you can learn those skills, but to give the students a better product, you might have to advocate to have someone else come in that's a specialist and help. But also at the same time, you are advocating for yourself because it is better for your well-being to stay within your bag as to where you would be most successful and you can best push the program forward. Because
Correct.
if you're having to do all those different things, you can't be out in front and steer. You can't paddle and steer at the same time. You know what I mean? Like hopefully you have some other people that you can bring on board that can help do the paddling, and you can help guide the direction of the group and do the things that the other people can't do. But if you're relegating yourself to things that other people on your team can do, then you're not necessarily using yourself in the highest way. And I think that you should advocate for putting yourself in a position where you can move the program forward.
Well, I think some of that too has to come down to sitting down with that team and going, what does everybody want? And where's everyone willing to put their chips? You know, because essentially, like, I forget who brought it up earlier about, like, if you have a kid at home and you know, if your life circumstance changes, you know, for the ship to keep going, the number of chips in the center of the table has to stay the same. So if you've got to pull some chips back, somebody else has to push some chips in, you know. And I think that's where that helps, is having that team that can, like, at any point in time, somebody goes, hey, I need this, which is really what advocacy is. Hey, I need this. And then go, we can help with that. We can help cover that. So I think this talk of like the team thing is huge. And at some point you have to know, like, when is the team right and when is the team wrong? Because I think we've all probably been a part of things where it's like, hey, the team that got us to where we are now might not be the team that's going to get us to the next destination, you know. And at some point there has to be that of like, hey, we either need to bring somebody else on to help you get us there, like advocating for that person's, you know, education, and that kind of thing, or just going, hey, I think we need to part ways for, you know, where we're looking, thank you for everything that you've done, this, that, and the other thing. But I think it's kind of keeping track of what everyone's goals are, and that everyone is willing to put in the number of chips it takes for the ship to keep going, or the game to keep going, or however you want to think about it. That's another form of advocacy, just that everyone is helping everybody out. Again, talking about like just advocacy as what we need, doing that kind
Yeah,
of
I want to highlight Ryan's definition. Advocacy, as we're speaking about it, means I need help in ... And then fighting for those resources that help in that specific area. I think it would be cool, and if we want to go a different route, let me know, but I think it may be cool, is since we're talking about advocacy, self-help right now, if we kind of talk about that with our own experiences at the different areas of life for our listeners. So for example, if we have a listener that maybe say they're just starting off in college, what should they advocate for themselves in their lifetime in that specific moment. Maybe someone who just graduated is now getting a tech job. Maybe someone who is just starting out as a director. Maybe someone who's been doing this 5, 10, 20 plus years. In the grand scheme of, as we're talking about advocacy, how it can help yourself, these are some talking points you may want to consider depending on where you are in the sphere of life. What do y'all think about that?
Let's do
I
it.
think they could be really good.
Okay, so I'm very what?
No,
What,
you
Rob?
can go
What do
ahead.
you wanna
You can
say?
go ahead, John. No.
No, I was
I guess the first thing that popped into my head, obviously, all those things would be different. As a student, I'm. I don't know. I think the first thing that pops to my head is being a tech and just thinking about my own personal trajectory of like just having. I'd assume that as a tech, you would want to advocate for one, obviously, pay, like good competitive pay. And I would say next would be maybe other opportunities that you might be looking for, depending on what your trajectory is with that program or where you see yourself going within your career. So I think Ryan brought up a really good thing in that, like, you need to have that conversation with the people that you're working with in your team. And it might be something that maybe you have to initiate with your band director. You have to initiate with the people that you're working around, or whomever that, you're in contact with, you're on the team with. You might have to say, hey, this is where I am right now. This is where I see myself going. This is where I see the program going. How can we get to this place? And these are some of the landmarks of us getting there. And this is where I want to go. And they may say, hey, well, we're trying to get to X, Y, and Z. Let's see if we can set you up with, a mentor to help you like grow in visual design or help you grow in your battery books and your, music writing or whatever it is that you're trying to move into. Maybe they can create an opportunity for that. But again, as a person, whatever your trajectory is in your career, you would never know whether or not they have the resources or the connections to help you do that if you don't advocate for yourself. If you don't speak up for yourself and say, hey, I'm teching right now, but I want to do this. I want to move into this space. I want to further what I'm doing. And I think this is an important point. This is how this would help this band program. Because there has to be like a meeting or a crossroads. You know what I mean? Like you're not at a program obviously to just get everything that you need, but you're also there to give that program what they need. So I think one of the biggest points in the advocacy conversation is, can you explain to the person that you're asking for help from how them helping you benefits them? How does it benefit this program for you to give me an opportunity to do this? How does it benefit this program for me to, take on more responsibility? And how does that translate into dollars and cents? So I think that's something to keep in your mind when you're talking to people about, advocating for yourself, is like, how does this help them? And how does helping them, cause everybody to grow?
Yeah. The thing that popped into my mind when you were talking, Rob, is I think the first thing we all have to do is ask ourselves, what do we need at any given point? And that will help us guide what we advocate for. John talked about the different positions we could be in, whether it's, just graduating from college, getting our first tech gig, becoming a director, becoming a band director, becoming a designer, whatever. I think you have to ask yourself, like, what are you looking for from this stage in your life? Because this is not like, life is like a game. We're going to level up. Like or you have the ability to level up. Some people might not. Okay. But you have the ability. You have the ability to level up. But you got to ask yourself, at the level that I'm at, what do I need to level up? And I think one of the things that Rob talked about at the very beginning, he said opportunity. I think even more important than dollars and cents, especially when you're first getting your feet wet, is are those opportunities, because a lot of those first tech gigs, you might not have control over how much you're getting paid to teach. I know when I first started, I was writing and teaching the band, like the percussion section, for $1,500. People would look at it now and be like,
Wait, for the whole season?
Yeah, the whole marching band season. People now would
That's
look at it and
crazy.
be like, I'd never do anything like that for that amount of money. And you're right. But sometimes those are the only gigs available, depending on when you start looking, depending on what's available in your area, depending on where you live. Sorry. Sometimes those are the only opportunities you have. So you got to maximize those opportunities to be like, all right, well, I'm not getting paid right now, but maybe I have full autonomy to like hone my craft. And that way I can start to like hone what I do, maybe from a design standpoint, from a teaching standpoint, and then I can go to this program where maybe I have a little bit more influence on how much I get paid, and go, hey, these are the things I bring to the table. And then to Rob's other point, like, this is how I can help you. Let me help you by helping me in the situation that we're in. So I think you got to ask yourself, what level are you at, or what stage in life are you at, and what do you need to get out of that stage? $1 million is not the right answer if you're at level 1.
Right. Wasn't it you who said, I feel like we had this conversation months ago, like the ideal work environment. If you get 2 out of the 3, that's a great place. It was like money, the people, and like the atmosphere or the environment or something. Does anyone recall? Did we have that conversation on here?
I remember having that conversation, but I don't remember exactly what the 3 were.
I don't know if we had it on here or not, or if we actually talked about it on the cast or not, but I'm familiar somewhat with the concept. I mean, it makes sense, because ideally, and let's just use those 3, right? We said people, money, and we'll say environment.
Like, environment.
Environment, right? So, very rarely, and I always lead with this, very rarely do people leave jobs for money. They usually leave jobs because of the people, right? Either they're going somewhere where they're going to be more valued, right? Or they're leaving somewhere where they felt undervalued, right? Because people will take a pay cut because they felt undervalued or they felt underappreciated by the people that they worked around, or they will willingly walk into a situation where they don't know anybody because they want more money, right? So I mean, it's kind of those things to where it's like you'll walk into an unknown environment with more money where you don't know anybody. So there's 2 out of 3. Or you're walking to a great environment where you know everybody and know you're getting paid terrible. There's 2 out of 3, right? So it's just like, you're kind of like, you're always, I think that 2 out of 3 kind of holds true. But I think one of the things that we can kind of lean on in that conversation when we're talking about those is thinking about the concept of when I myself am trying to put myself in a position or a place of opportunity, I need to be thinking 3 levels forward and not in the current moment. And I think that's where a lot of instructors get hung up, is they're thinking about what they got in their bag right now, and they need to be thinking about what's going to be in their bag 10 steps down the road, right? And unfortunately, there's so many devices working against them in the here and now. You can't do this. Sorry. This only what I need you for right now. And you have to be able to silence ego. You have to be able to silence pride. You have to be able to silence like insecurities, right? Because all those things can get in the way of long-term goals when you were trying to get down the road to something else, right? So kind of to put it into perspective, and we talked about using some personal stories, right? When I first started out, I was teching a whole lot. Three, four high schools at a time, right? Always, and everybody's had this story at least once or twice, right? You know, it comes in waves in your career, right? Maybe you weren't doing a lot of writing. I was doing writing for maybe one school, but most of it was just teaching. And I think that's where I really cut my teeth in just being able to educate, because I was doing more teaching hour by hour than I was anything else. So the dabbling part for me was kind of learning how to write, but most of it was like foot on the ground, teaching, with doing some writing here and there. And then once I did that for like 4 or 5 years, it kind of flipped to where I was doing way more writing and not as much teaching. And when the writing started picking up, that's where I started to really shift kind of my perspective in terms of trying to get more people teaching with me while I was doing the writing, to build their opportunity based on what I had done. Saying, okay, this is now your teaching season. I'm going to do the writing for you so that you can start building in the teaching and get that out of the way, so that when it's time for your writing season to come up, you're not worried about when you have to go in and learn how to teach, because you've already got that, right? So it's like, once you've kind of got that skill set built, now you can walk into anybody's rehearsal and be able to immediately jump in and be effective. Same way now you can walk into anybody's, rehearsal or design meeting and as a writer and immediately be effective. As a designer, you can walk in and immediately be effective. And I think that's what we're all searching for in our careers, is the capacity in any of these skill sets to be able to jump in somewhere and immediately be effective. And that's what people hope for us as well. That's why they hire us. They hire us because they have this hope and glean that we can be immediately effective once we're hired and in place. But in order for that to transpire, we have to have, AKA Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000 hours put in for us. In order to get to that 10,000 hours, we have to set ourselves up in those opportunities to be able to capture it. But we have to be chasing the right opportunities in the right seasons of our lives. And I think sometimes on our younger years, that pride will kind of catch up with us, and we will want to do all of it all at once, as opposed to kind of taking that step back and saying, what's the thing I can capture the most of right now that no one else is trying to capture? Let me get that. And as I'm getting that, I can dabble in these other things, but I'm gonna get all these shrimp first. And once I get all these shrimp, then I'll move on to the next big fish down the road. And I think that's the route I took. Was I saw that the teaching jobs were open, not necessarily the writing jobs, the teaching jobs. So I was like, I go teach everybody. I don't care. I teach here, I'll teach there, I'll teach everybody. Right. So I got all the teaching jobs. People used to make fun of me because I go to a competition and you'd hear my name band after band after band. They're like, how are you teaching so many bands? It's like, look, there's 5 days in a week. I could teach as many bands as I can drive to a rehearsal, right? But that's when you have the mindset to get after it that way, then you are figuring out where find the opportunities where they are, chase that, build that skill set. And then once you've built that skill set, now start to rotate and move on, because you can continue to build other things. You don't immediately have to like go full-fledged into something to be able to build something else. But I will say this though, while I was teaching those groups, because I was still writing and doing a lot of writing on my own, when an opportunity opened and a band director was like, hey, can you write this book? Absolutely. There it was. And that's all I needed. All I needed was that voice. But you know who they trusted to do it? The person that had been teaching there for 3 years. Right? Right. You see
Yep.
what I'm saying? So it's like you have to put yourself in the position to be able to gain the trust to put, and it's a different landscape now. I will say there are way more designers in in the field now, that are quote unquote designing great products, and I get it. But I still think that there is a level of trust that is coming with people, that really want instructors that can immediately be effective in what they do. And that takes a lot of practice to be immediately effective. You have to do it. You can't just listen to a podcast or read a book about it. You have to get in the field, and you have to actually teach and educate. So
Would agree. I think you brought up a really good point in that you got to start with where you are. And I think one of the things that is missed a lot of times, especially by those of us that want to be, on the more creative side and less of the technician nuts and bolts side, is like, no matter how good your MP3s are, no matter how amazing your compositions are, if you don't know enough band directors, you're not going to write for anybody. And then on top of that, if not enough band directors trust you, you know what I mean? Like, they have to trust something about you. And like E was saying, I think the thing that's the easiest for us to hold on to, or for people to latch on to, is if you do one thing really, really, really well, you're not just doing that one thing really well. You're lobbying and building that skill and parlaying that into a completely different opportunity. Because I can't think of one school, like E was saying, that I taught that I did really well in the teaching aspect, that it didn't eventually lead to me writing for them. And even though I might not have stayed at that program consistently afterwards, I still was able to, kind of parlay that into designing on some level for them, so that I'm still connected to them, even though I'm not at their school anymore. Maybe I went to another school that pays me more money to teach, or they have a more expansive program. I'm still able to have that connection with them. I think one of the things that I want to have you guys touch on, uh, before we kind of, because this is, I think, the biggest thing that everybody's going to think about when you think about self advocacy, is pay. Like, my question to you guys would be, how have you, or how would you frame the conversation if you're having a conversation with a band director or whomever about advocating for you to get a certain, maybe to get paid more, or to get an opportunity that would make sense for you to get paid more? Because obviously you're not gonna be like, hey, I'm a tech, I just want to work with these 4 snare drummers and I want to get paid $1,500 a month, I only want to work with those 4 guys. Like, you're not going to get paid for that. You know what I mean? But how do you handle the conversation of approaching a band director or anyone else, in your drum corps or independent group? How do you approach that conversation of advocating for yourself being paid?
I feel like you first have to do some research and see what they're asking. When you see the job post on Facebook Marketplace, on Facebook, right, on one of those Facebook pages, or you hear it from one of your friends, what does the job description entail? Is it looking for a tech? Is it looking for an assistant band director position, which you need certain qualifications? What are the requirements, prerequisites, I guess you could say, from an education standpoint? And really, experience, I think, is going to dictate how much you're going to get paid, whether it's per hour, whether it's per week, per month, whatever. The amount of experience is, number one, paramount to any organization. So if you don't have a lot of experience, I think you need to see what the director is offering you for each segment of band, right? The first segment of band is the summer band. Those end of the week for July and the beginning week of August. How much are you going to get paid for summer band? Okay, is that for a 2-a-day or a 3-day, right? Each block, I break it down 4-hour blocks. Is that for an 8-hour day or a 12-hour day? Does that include any extracurricular weekend activities? So first, once you kind of get that figured out, I say that's one part of the conversation. And then the second conversation, if they like what you do and if the whole contract includes teaching in the fall, okay, how many rehearsals? How long are the rehearsals? Are you required to go to the football games or only some of the football games? Are you required to go to all the band competitions? When are the band competitions? And then that's the second part of the whole tech job in my eyes. And then the third part is what comes after, right? The winter months. Is there an indoor program that you'll be teaching? Or will you be helping with solo ensemble or percussion ensemble in the spring, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to that, and these are some of your talking points or questions you want to ask these directors, because the more questions you ask and the better idea of what the job entails, this is all how you can kind of start weaving out, okay, I'd like to get this amount of money. Okay, this is what you're asking, this is where I'm at, maybe we can meet in the middle, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to that, ask, are there any lesson opportunities available? I would say, because again, with that conversation, are you getting paid through the band boosters or are you getting paid through district funds? And that also is sometimes a barrier, the cap. How much can you ask? If it's a well-established program, band boosters, you can probably get paid a lot more than maybe a district says you only get, each band's allotted this amount of money. The director gets to use that month's money however he wants or she wants. Maybe you won't be able to pay for that season as much. But if lessons are included, because that's how band directors kind of help supplement the travel costs, right? How far are you traveling one way for those rehearsals? Because in my experience, when I got a tech gig in Texas, and this is when I was still teaching at TCU and doing school, I would get paid for the month, the summer months, to the band boosters, and then I would get paid for the fall activity like everyone else. But because I was able to work with my schedule, I was able to take a lower pay because I knew it was, again, what Ryan talked about earlier, the opportunities, right? Grinding out, getting to meet those band directors, putting your name out in the area. I knew it was best at that time to take a lower pay cut because I was getting my name out in the area and I was kind of learning the logistics of the Texas life, right? Getting that experience. And after I graduated from TCU, I knew my pay could increase a little bit because the director at the time was also offering lessons. So I would go teach morning rehearsals, and then I'd spend the whole day teaching, following him, teaching lessons for his varsity, his non-varsity, going to the middle school, 7th, 8th grade, going to the 6th grade campus, et cetera, et cetera. And if he couldn't fill all those spots, and I was probably teaching 20 or 30 students from his band, then whatever days I had left over, since I've already got my name out in that district, I was able to work with other high schools or other middle schools. That's probably way too much information of what you were just asking, Rob, simply. But these are all things you have to factor in when it's coming down to pay. I'd say in today's age, if we were just going to give out a number, I'd say at least $20 an hour is reasonable. Again, depending on the size of the band program, maybe they can only offer $15 an hour. But then again, I come from a finance background in math as well. And if you break it down per hour, you're never going to get paid what you work. Like even if you're like a band director, you're not a tech, and you're getting paid, you break it down with how many times you're staying after school for after rehearsals or football games, your per hour basis is terrible. It is. But then that's why people say you go into music not for the money, but for the relationships and the music making and the expression, etc., etc. Whatever you want to convince yourself, it's fine. Anyway, but that's why most of the time band directors will probably say, I can pay you $1,500 for 2 weeks of band camp instead of I'll pay you $15 an hour, etc., etc. So I'd say if it's the fall season and they're asking for a per hour basis, 15 to 20 if you're just starting out. If you've been doing it for a while, and again, depends on how much, like E said, how much you're doing. Are you teaching the battery and the front? Are you writing the book? Are you doing any extracurricular with the choreography and the drill? Like all those extra stuff, you could probably start bumping it up to 25, 30. I don't know, a lot of techs in Texas are getting paid more than 30, unless you're like a designer, then you're probably getting paid 50 plus, etc. Typically, in my experience, it's always a pre-package of you're going to get paid 15, 15 to maybe 2,500 for 2 to 3 weeks of 3 days during the summer. And then per month, you probably get paid, I don't know, maybe 1,000 to 1,500. And then they'll always say supplemental with lessons. And with lessons, depending on where you're at and how much you want to teach, that can be either, again, dictated by the district of $12 to $20 per half hour lesson. So if you want to get 2 students and they're 50 minutes each, it's basically 22 and a half with travel time. So that's a lot of information. I don't know if it helps. Hopefully it does, just being a little bit more transparent. But that's kind of, I feel, in my experience, that's kind of the standard is you're going to get paid 15 to 20 bucks an hour. You're going to get supplemental lessons, and you're going to get prepackaged blocks of for summer, for fall, etc. Have you guys had different experiences than mine? And are those experiences okay?
It's going to greatly depend on where you're at, because Florida don't pay like that. Not
Ohio
Northwest
doesn't
Florida.
either.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I want to hear the juice.
I mean,
Oh boy.
the most I've ever gotten paid teaching percussion in Florida is $1,000 a month, and I was teaching every class period and after school rehearsals, and it was 2 instructors at the school. And I mean that's I mean that, like I said, that was me at the maximum teaching that school. But I'd say like the normal pay in Florida for a high school band instructor is for $300 to $500 a month. But that, I mean,
For how many rehearsals?
For how many rehearsals depends on the band. Usually it's like 2 to 3 rehearsals a week. Friday night football games, and then if you rehearse on Saturdays, if you're a real competitive band, or if you don't rehearse on Saturdays, then competitions. But
so about 125 per week, maybe per rehearsal. If you got 4, let's say, well, wait, what would that break down to? That wouldn't
Don't
be
break it
half
down
of
per
125.
hour, Rob.
No,
No,
don't do
no,
that.
I'm not saying per hour. I mean, I think of things per rehearsal in general. So
I do too.
that's yeah.
if
so I was
you
thinking,
think
get paid,
maybe 8 rehearsals a month, if you was getting $400 a month and you thinking 8 rehearsals a month, it's about $50 a rehearsal.
got you.
It's just
So I mean, that's less than 3-hour rehearsal blocks.
It depends on. That's what I was about to say.
Depending
Depending on how long the rehearsal is.
That's like $16 an hour. I mean, barely. But I mean, that's not including staying after for maintenance. That's not including sectionals, because in my band, we rehearse for 4 hours, 3 hours, and then 4 hours. So I mean, it's 7 hours a week, not 6 hours a week. So I mean, like, it varies. So I mean, it depends on where you're at, man. It really does.
Come to Georgia. Come to Georgia.
I mean, yeah, Georgia doesn't have anybody, but come to Texas if you want to get paid.
I was like, I need to go to Texas.
I think it depends. I think it depends on what the rehearsal situation is. Because I mean, honestly, I can't think of a tech job outside of maybe that first job that I had that maybe I got paid less than 1,000 and it was 2 rehearsals per week. Like, it at least came out to like about 100 to almost 125 per rehearsal. It was like 2, maybe 3-hour rehearsal.
Bro, never have I ever.
You live in the sweet life.
What bands are y'all working for? Lord Jesus.
Well, that's just the unfortunate part is there's pockets of the country where it's just like that's the support that either the community has or the school has, or a combination of the two. And
That's true.
Especially if, like, there are some schools up here where it's like the boosters are the only source of funding, which means that every dollar is raised by parent volunteers. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of schools up here, you know, and I think the biggest unfortunate answer to the question is, where are you at and what are you willing to live with in terms of time commitment and financial compensation? You know, I think you have to be willing to draw either a hard line in the sand and say, hey, I can't do it for that, or you got to go, all right, let's go, and just use that as an opportunity to hopefully put you in a position for another one. But I think it depends a lot on where you're at. You know, there's a big school down the road from us, and I'm not going to name names, that, you know, I was talking to a buddy of mine that got paid a couple $100 for the whole season.
That's terrible. That's not worth it, because
you know what,
you got to think about travel costs.
We should I know obviously we're not unionized here as independent contractors of music education. But Lord Jesus, I feel like some of these things are highway robbery, and we need to band together and be like, I'm not taking that low ball crap, because it makes everybody think that they can do the same thing. Now that's not, here's another thing that I think is important as well, especially because in most of these situations, unless you're like a paraprofessional or you're working with the school system, you are an independent contractor. I think this is why it's very important that you lobby for your time and you advocate for the time that you are there. Like, if your job is to be there and to do certain things, like if, let's say the first hour is going to be visual only and you're not there to be a visual tech, and you're like, I want this opportunity, but maybe this doesn't necessarily fit the amount of money that I want, it might be worth negotiating like what you're actually there to do, if that's possible. You know what I mean? To say, hey, I really want to be here. I love this opportunity, but for the travel space or whatever it is that I'm taking, like, I can't get there and do that at that price point. Is it possible for me to just be responsible for the music education part of it and not this first hour where it's visual? Like, I think these are also things that have to kind of be turning in our heads. If you really want the opportunity, like, find a way that you can help them best, but also still advocate for yourself. Because like Ryan was saying, and he was saying, like, you might be in a situation where they just don't have the money, and you don't want to like blow up the opportunity because, you know, they don't have the money. Just make it an opportunity that still works for them and works for you.
Compromise.
Without like putting yourself in a hole.
Yeah. Compromise sometimes is the best option that you've got.
Mm-hmm.
Would agree. Well, I think this has been a really, really, really great conversation on self-advocacy. We are super excited.
We're done. We can't be done.
It's all we got, John. I mean, you talked about.
But we only did the first part. We didn't get about advocating if you're a first-time director, and then if you're an old director.
Well,
you have to tune in more, folks, for
for part 3 of self-advocacy.
In our 10-part series.
Really important.
Advocacy is really important. So we can definitely extend this a little bit further.
Yeah, because I would agree. I would like to come back and talk about that, because I would really like to hear John's John talk more about the Texas school system and how that might apply to some of us. Because obviously, I feel like the coolest thing or doesn't.
Sorry.
I
can talk about my Georgia and South Carolina experience.
Okay, here's what I'll say. I feel like for Texas, it's a cool system that in my part of the country, I kind of have to like create it myself. So at least I can use it as a template to talk to my director and be like, hey, I know that we don't have this set up through the county, but do you think you can talk to the middle school director so that I can go down there and teach, and then I can come up to the high school and teach, and then I can be there after school? Like, I have to kind of piecemeal it myself, and I'd assume that other people might have to do the same thing if your school system doesn't have it already set up. But at least it gives a direction as to like, here's a model and you kind of have to set that up and advocate for yourself why you need to be teaching all these kids from 6th grade all the way through 12th grade. So I think that's another part that's really important of self-advocacy. So I definitely would like to come back and talk about that. I am super glad that we're having this conversation and you guys are able to be a part of it. So if you would like to reach out to us, or you have questions about maybe a particular scenario, how to talk, advocate for a raise or being able to be on the design team, whatever, like you have questions, you can reach out to us at any point in time. You can reach out to us on Instagram at Volta Percussion or at voltapercussion@gmail.com. Obviously, you can check out any of our podcasts on YouTube or on iHeartRadio, iTunes, etc., Spotify, all the platforms. You can check us out. So we're super excited, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Bye.